Every day I work with incredible kids, and I'm continually astonished at the opportunities that come up for me to touch or to change a young person's life. What might begin with teaching students how to discern a musical phrase or interpret an articulation eventually leads to students thinking for themselves, to put their own individual signature on the music they play. As my students realize that they hold the power to bring a composer's ideas to life, they soon find out that they can also give voice to their own ideas and their own feelings. I believe that music is more than an activity that enriches one's academic education. Music should be learned and experienced for its own benefit. There's value to learning to be a literate musician, knowing how to read musical notation, not because it can transfer into helping a student in math or writing computer code, but because of the universality of music as a language itself, and as a form of communication that links us to human beings around the world. But most importantly, there's value to learning how to express oneself emotionally and creatively through works of art. I am insistent that every one of my students learns how to read and interpret music so that they can make musical decisions based upon their musical experience. I teach students to understand musical styles and grooves, to improvise and compose, and above all, to take risks as they learn the musical language. I also believe that students get turned on to music by meeting, working, and performing with the people who are making the music. I regularly bring musicians from the New York City area to my school to work and perform with my students. My students have worked with Broadway musicians, members of the New York Philharmonic, faculty members from Juilliard, and Grammy Award winners from the jazz world, including New York Voices and even the Count Basie Orchestra. Even when the band travels, I find outstanding professional musicians in our destinations to work and perform with my students in real-life venues and under real-life conditions. All of these musicians are happy to share their experiences and stories with my students, and that makes the music industry real to them. While I've experienced hundreds of great performances and musical moments with my students as their conductor, I believe that the students really show what they've learned when they can rehearse and perform on their own. Nothing is more gratifying than knowing that I've given them the tools and confidence to perform without me. So when they ask if I can help them start a chamber ensemble or a jazz combo, I know I've made a true musical connection. I also know I've made a connection when I see what my students achieve after graduation. The fact that so many of my students choose to continue in music after high school is itself a huge source of pride for me. Some of my students have gone on to professional careers as jazz or studio musicians or in major symphony orchestras, and many have become music teachers themselves. But even more go on to be successful in other careers while keeping music in their lives. When they care enough to stay in touch with me or to share their success stories, it leads me to believe that I've done my job well. My former students like to come back and introduce me to their husbands, wives, children, and many former students have come back to work with me here at Ridgewood High School. I've recently had several proud moments that include being acknowledged on a student's first CD, having one of my students be named as a conductor for the United States Air Force Band stationed in Washington, and finally, and I think most notably, seeing the name of one of my former students, Gary Bernice, appear on the list of quarterfinalists for the Grammy Music Educator Award. Nothing could make me more proud than to know that the values that were instilled in me by my great teachers have now been passed to the next generation, and that they in turn will keep those values alive and thriving. Most of my teaching is done in a large group setting. This challenges me to find ways to give each of my students a personal experience as a member of the band. Some of my students have special needs due to autism, deafness, or physically debilitating conditions, while others are dealing with issues of personal tragedy or sexual identity. Those who have no special issues are still teenagers, and that's challenge enough. Music helps kids find themselves in the confusion of adolescence, and I help them learn to explore their vulnerability in order to express their emotions and connect with an audience. Regardless of how they come to the band, I work hard to make my room a place without pressure, without judgment, and without obstacles. My students know that I'm there for them whenever they need me, to share in their triumphs or to be there in times of tragedy or great loss. I believe that my passion for music and for the power it holds speaks to my students, so that they in turn feel they can speak to and confide in me. It's difficult to express my vision for great music education without putting it into the context of educating the complete child. When today's education reformers talk about increasing opportunities for assessment and accountability, I think they're missing the point. Having students with all the answers is not as important to the future of our nation as it is to have students who approach questions with creativity and passion. That's how we'll find our next energy source, a cure for cancer, and maybe even consensus in our government. We don't need kids whose worth is formulated by how many bubbles are correctly filled in while their stress levels raise through the roof. We need kids who can express themselves in socially acceptable and nonviolent ways. We don't need our students or teachers to go to school fearing what they themselves may lose. We need them to live in hope of what the world can gain from their hard work. Music education does not exist to help children achieve higher scores on standardized tests, but it does that. It's not music's role to prepare our students for the workplace, and it's not to help the U.S. compete in the global marketplace, but it does those things too. The role of music is to give voice to the voiceless, to give expression to the inexpressible, and to create beauty during turmoil, and to give hope in times of despair. Great music education reminds us that schools are places where we must care for children and where we must nurture their spirits, their creativity, their passion, and their compassion. Great music education reminds us that we are not a nation of data, but that we are a nation of thinkers, creators, and innovators, that we have feelings, hopes, and dreams, that we suffered defeats and tragedies, and that we can rise from these setbacks to face each day courageously. Great music education reminds us that we are still human.